Great. All right. Well, greetings and hello. My name is Brett Veerhusen. Thank you very much, Congressman Jared Huffman, for joining us today. Real quick, I'm a lifelong Alaskan commercial fisherman and principal for Ocean Strategies. We're a public affairs firm focused specifically on fisheries and seafood and other natural resources. Every quarter, Ocean Strategies creates fishery policy reports, which provide analysis and insight on key policies and issues impacting sustainable seafood for the entire seafood supply chain, including fishermen, processors, but then also distributors, restaurants, grocers, all key players in ensuring Americans have access to delicious and healthy seafood. And there's no more important law to this food system than the Magnuson-Stevens Act, the federal law that governs our nation's fisheries. U.S. fisheries management is considered worldwide to be very much the gold standard in sustainable fisheries management, following principles, many of which also include transparency, accountability, and science. And that's what we'll be talking about today. And I have the honor of speaking with California Congressman Jared Huffman, chairman of the House Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife. Congressman Huffman was elected to Congress in 2012 and serves on the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. So thank you very much, Congressman, for joining us today.
Well, great to be with you, Brett. Look forward to a good conversation, and I'm glad that all of the folks that you advise and communicate with are tuning in so that we can hopefully work on these issues together and make some progress.
Yeah, very, very much so. I'm looking forward to it, Congressman. And I'm looking forward to diving in more on the Sustaining America's Fisheries for the Future Act, which you introduced last week with your colleague, Representative Ed Case from Hawaii, seeking to reauthorize the Magnuson-Stevens Act. So let's talk about the bill in a second, but we like to start with the really tough questions first, Congressman.
Okay.
And that is, what is your favorite seafood to eat and why?
Wow. So that's a wonderful dilemma because there's so much good seafood out there. And even though I represent a lot of salmon fishermen, I'm going to have to say halibut is my favorite eating fish.
Is it? And why?
Because I think you can cook halibut in every possible way, and it's delicious every way you can possibly. It's just an amazingly versatile and delicious fish.
It's a good answer. I grew up commercial fishing for halibut, long lining off of the Alaska Peninsula. It's nice and meaty, flaky, but has a nice texture. It's good, good. See, we'll learn everything. Something new about the Congressman. Well, you held 8 listening sessions around the country with a variety of stakeholders, including commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, tribal representatives, environmental NGOs, seafood supply chain, including restaurateurs. What was the biggest common concern shared amongst these stakeholders, and how does the bill address it?
Yeah, so first, one thing we heard loud and clear everywhere we went from just about every part of the stakeholder community. And by the way, we tried to include everyone. You listed a bunch of the groups. If there's somebody that we missed, we didn't mean to miss you, and we want to bring you into this conversation. But people believe, by and large, that the Magnuson-Stevens Act has been successful, that there's nothing fatally broken about this law. And so when we talk about reauthorizing it, that's an important data point, that we don't need to completely reimagine it and to dramatically transform it. And, we've heard a lot about the need for better data, the need for better science so that we can make better decisions. Those are also some of the things that just about everybody agreed on.
Got it. Got it. And regarding on science, there's a lot of obviously impacts right now with climate change in fisheries. We're seeing dramatic movements in stocks, and just the whole ecosystem is shifting quite rapidly, and fishermen are often the canaries in the coal mine, the first to see what's happening. What have you heard and what did you hear across regions? It's probably different amongst regions and the impacts are different, but around climate change, what are some ways that you're hoping to kind of solve and add to kind of the scientific arguments that are happening today on the water?
Well, climate change was also something we heard about every place we went, but you're right. What we heard differed. Because I think the climate impacts are different right now. If you are in the Gulf of Maine on the East Coast, for example, you are seeing more stock shifts than anywhere else in at least the American fishery zones. So they totally get that we have got to tackle this problem of dramatically shifting stocks. And the Magnuson-Stevens Act and the regional council framework that was set up there just really didn't even contemplate this type of thing. So there isn't a mechanism, there isn't a directive to include these things in the council's work. And we're trying to move all of the councils forward into this climate-ready fisheries paradigm. That is going to be different in each region. And in the Gulf Coast, we also heard about climate change, but it was about how it's affecting habitat. And I suspect that up in Alaska and in other regions, it may be some combination of either stock shifts or anticipated stock shifts and habitat. We were talking before we started recording this morning about Bristol Bay. And I think one of the takeaways, if we're going to try to have climate-ready fisheries, we've got to identify our fishery strongholds, our essential fish habitat, and have tools that are meaningful tools to protect those things, because we're going to need more protections of fisheries and habitat going forward if we're going to adapt to and get through the climate change that we know is coming.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned Bristol Bay. My colleague Georgie Everly's on with us and just got back from a banner year, 64 million plus sockeye salmon coming back from Bristol Bay. So and as a former Bristol Bay fisherman, I'd be remiss not to thank the congressman for all your work in helping stop the proposed Pebble mine. And thank you for all your work there. Obviously it's a salmon factory and provides food security to the nation, especially in this critical time. So thank you for that.
Well, and it's more important than ever, because let me tell you, down in my neck of the woods, salmon are not doing well at all. So I'm glad you had a bumper sockeye year in Bristol Bay, but our salmon populations are just crashing in California, Oregon, and Washington, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But one provision in our Magnuson-Act reauthorization that would help, I think, is to provide a meaningful consultation requirement when essential fish habitat is threatened by any number of types of projects, whether that is, a pebble mine type of project, or whether it's offshore wind, which is something that I want to see happen. I want to see it succeed, but we really need to make sure that our fishery managers and our fishing communities are at the table as we put together those type of projects.
Yeah, appreciate those remarks. Obviously, EFH, essential fish habitat, was really important in consulting with Bristol Bay, but other key infrastructure developments too. So bringing all stakeholders to the table and getting input is going to be very necessary going forward, regardless of coast or region. On climate, back to climate a little bit. Obviously, certain councils, have more proactivity around impacts of climate change, and also maybe have resources and additional expertise, and it varies. How do we fund all the needs for understanding the impacts for climate change around the country?
We're definitely going to have to step up the funding side of this, because we can talk about the need for more science and more data. At some point, though, this does cost money. And so, I will do my best as we reauthorize Magnuson to put the best statute on the books. But we're going to need our partners in the appropriations committees and through that process annually to put the dollars on the table and to make it work.
And so, if I'm hearing correctly, in addition to your point of if there's any new voices on the Magnuson Act that haven't been heard, but also voices that are active, in the reauthorization process are going to be critical for kind of appropriations and where funding kind of comes from to ensure that everything is properly funded and we have the tools available and the capacity available.
And it's an annual drill back in Washington. So really the work that we're doing to try to reset a good process, to do this national listening tour, to try to hit as much consensus as we can in this legislation is going to be critical to having as much unity as possible in the fishing community so that that coalition can go together to appropriators and get those dollars. If the fishing community is just a circular firing squad and we're constantly fighting with each other and there's all these crazy fault lines, it's a lot harder to get the appropriations and to have the resources we need.
Yeah, focusing on what we can agree on rather than, the 5% that we can't, which sometimes can overtake the conversation. So kind of looking at some of the specific provisions in your bill, there's a variety of changes that enhance scientific management practices like rebuilding plans, data collection and accountability, habitat protections, and bycatch reductions. So there's a lot there. I think if it's okay with you, kind of zoom in on the last one as an example of how this bill takes on some of these management challenges, just so our readers and viewers can kind of understand kind of the specifics and what that really means. So, I've been a fisherman my whole life. I understand that unintended harvest of species is almost unavoidable, but we're always seeking to improve. And so the bill strengthens language to reduce bycatch. Why is that important?
Well, bycatch, as you mentioned, is something that is kind of inevitable in most types of fishing. But we haven't made the kind of progress on bycatch reduction that we really need to make. And honestly, if you think about the productivity of our oceans and the demand for seafood, we really can't afford to have huge levels of bycatch. It's terrible for the ecosystem. It's wasteful. These are fish that we need. If we're going to be catching them, we need to get them to market and find a way to actually use them. So all of those factors compel us to do more. And we've had a pretty lax approach to bycatch for the last many years under the Magnuson Act.
So your goal is to make sure we have kind of maximum use of the species targeted and minimum use of this species unintended, for lack of a better way to kind of put it.
Yep.
Makes sense. And you were talking about kind of demand. So I'm sure, as you know, and we've all been kind of seeing the headlines who follow seafood or work in the industry, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated seafood consumption and demand within the US. In fact, I think domestic retail seafood sales continue to rise at a faster pace than beef and chicken and pork. I've been following, a lot of stories even this summer as we kind of look at year over year, comparisons. The FDA is recommending that all Americans, including children and pregnant women, eat more seafood than we currently do. And so how does, an updated Magnuson-Stevens Act support this healthy increase in America's seafood consumption?
Well, in several ways, the most important of which is making sure that there are sustainable fisheries out there to keep providing that seafood from American fishers, so that we're not importing things that are, frankly, it's mystery meat when we start importing seafood. And we're separately legislating on this scourge of illegal and unauthorized fishing, IUU fishing, as it's referred to. It's a huge problem. We import billions of dollars a year of mystery seafood in this country. And when you don't know, when you don't have that transparency and that traceability, odds are, whether you like it or not, you're contributing to really horrific environmental practices and human trafficking and slavery on the high seas, all sorts of just awful conditions that are part and parcel of the fishing fleets of some of these countries out there.
Yeah. And so having this robust, management system that allows fisheries to come back year after year sustainably in America kind of
Yeah.
increases our food security and helps provide that supply to meet the rising demand.
Yeah, it's a 1-2 punch, helping our domestic fishers be successful and productive and have sustainable harvests year in and year out, but then also leveling the playing field by cracking
Mm.
down on these bad actors and by getting at the problem of traceability and just the nebulous nature of a lot of our seafood importing.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks for that clarification. Just a couple few questions before we kind of wrap up here. Uh, Talking about infrastructure for a second, kind of switching to what's happening on land or on coastal waterfronts that make it possible to deliver, process, get ice, have corridors for freight. The bill also supports working waterfront infrastructure through both funding and I believe a new task force at the Department of Commerce. So how does infrastructure improvements coincide with your vision for a Magnuson reauthorization?
It's really important. It's another way in which we need to support and sustain U.S. fishers because the infrastructure that they depend on has really decayed in many places. I think about up and down my district, just the refrigeration side of what you mentioned is a mess. I mean, there's so few places where there's good refrigeration, and the dock facilities and really everything that they need is in disrepair and needs a lot of help. And it's important not just for the people who fish, but for everybody that is connected to working
Mhm.
waterfronts and to the folks who
Right.
make their living on the water, the whole seafood supply chain. And again, this investment in our fishers and the best fisheries management in the world will be rewarded because we'll crack down on some of these IUU fishing practices on the high seas and the imports, and hopefully the folks who make their living on the water in this country will be able to make a better go of it.
Yeah, and the people who uh, process it,
Yeah,
distribute it, deliver it
yeah.
to consumers have more access, to our coast and the infrastructure that's needed.
Yeah, a related provision is to modernize the fishery disaster relief program because we are going to see more fishery disasters because of climate change. And, my salmon fishers in California know about that all too well. But you shouldn't have to wait 2 years or more to get disaster relief when you've been unable to do, the activity that makes your living. And that has happened to my salmon fishermen, to lots of other fishers around the United States, because it's such a slow and non-responsive system. And people sell their boats and they move on, and that's happening all over the country. So we do include provisions to set some firm timelines and to move that money out to people that are hit by fishery disasters, and that'll be another way we hopefully sustain this industry.
And no better and more important time also in coming out of a pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic to fisheries and fishermen, and just making sure that people have the money and the resources when they need it most. I think that's a very smart strategy, and I appreciate that as well. I guess one final question before we wrap up. Passing a bill, no easy task. We know there needs to be broad momentum and consensus in both the House and the Senate to pass a Magnuson reauthorization. What do you see as the path forward for your bill, and how should people weigh in going forward?
Yeah, so it's hard to pass an act of Congress in the best of times, let alone right now, because our politics are so fractured and dysfunctional. But marine fisheries used to be something that was, I won't even say bipartisan, nonpartisan, right? And so my hope all along has been that if we put in place a really honest and transparent and inclusive process, that maybe we could get back to some of that nonpartisanship. And so far, at least in the stakeholder community, I see reason for optimism that people appreciate the way that we've approached that. Many of my Republican colleagues have told me that they appreciate it too. Now, I don't yet have Republican co-sponsors on this bill, but I'm not giving up on getting them. None is more important than Don Young of Alaska, one of the original authors of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. It might as well be called the Young or the Young Studs Act, as he likes to say. But he's a hugely important part of this policy space. And I have gotten a lot of feedback from him. I have made changes to the bill to try to address his concerns and suggestions. We've still got a few things to iron out, but I'm not giving up at all on going forward shoulder to shoulder with Don Young. And I think if we can make that happen, it becomes really much easier to push something through the Senate.
Right. And it's all, about windows of opportunity and support. I saw a lot of Alaska groups and community-based groups on your press release when the bill was released last week. So there's a lot of Alaskan voices too weighing in, of course, from around the country as well. Well, with that, Congressman, those are all the really tough questions. But I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if there's anything else you'd like to share with this audience today, for them to kind of know what to expect or what else is on your mind.
Well, the bill is in print. That's I guess first step was the listening tour and all of the feedback we got, including a discussion draft that circulated for months while we took more input. The bill is now in print. We'll be moving forward to a hearing, I believe, sometime in September or October. But as it goes forward, that doesn't mean that the opportunity for feedback is over. We continue to welcome folks' thoughts. We want this to be inclusive. We want to find as much consensus as possible. So stay tuned and hopefully keep working with us. So let's get this thing reauthorized, and we'll fine tune it and modernize it along the way. And I think that'll be a really, really good thing for the fishing community.
Wise words from the congressman, and thank you very much for your time and clear layout of what folks can expect with a potential hearing this fall, and lots of opportunities to weigh in. Sounds like open door policy with communicating with Congressman Huffman's office and staff, who I'd like to commend as well, have been excellent to work with, and through the listening sessions and taking feedback. I'd like to commend yourself, Congressman, and your staff and your whole office. It's been the process has been very open and transparent and appreciated from the entire supply chain.
Well, thank you, Brett and Georgie. Good to be with you, and look forward to seeing you down the road.
Very much so. Thank you. I'm going to stop recording now.